Well, Yorgos had been working, for quite a while with the production design team, Shona Heath and James Price, before I got involved. They didn't really show me what they'd been doing for quite a while. So I think the whole approach was to let me play a little bit before showing me anything. The way that Yorgos works is that he doesn't necessarily give you a vision that you have to kind of work to. He is very good at sort of setting you on a pathway to sort of find something, find the language, yourself a bit. So it wasn't at all prescriptive, and that was, what was so great about the job, that we were allowed to come up with things, and then he was steering the process. The book and the script is actually, well, the book is set in the late 1800s, 1880s, and the script actually, Tony had there was a date, I think it was 1886. So I went off on a mission to sort of, but I had been told by Yorgos that, I didn't need to be at all slavish to the period. I think it could have been any, I could have explored it in any way that I had wanted to. That was the kind of the theme, really, of the job description. But I did start with the late Victorian period, and when I was looking at all of the different shapes of that decade. There's this brief period when the shoulders do go massive. It's called the leg of mutton sleeve, and I had slightly avoided that because I just was interested in an earlier period where the skirts are very interesting. But actually, it was Yorgos who said, actually, I think we're missing a trick if we need to do the sleeves. So it very much came from him, actually. Let's just go for these sleeves and really embrace them. Yeah, I mean, they're not, those mini skirts are actually short. They're little knickers. They're not mini skirts. What I was thinking about was that because she's like a child, she's getting dressed, or she's being dressed by her maid, Mrs. Prim, and that, like how I've observed with my own kids, kids tend to lose their clothes quite quickly. They're often in a state of half dress. They're often not wearing their pants or not wearing their skirts, or things often get taken off. And I was playing with that idea. It also just looked really good. When I had this fitting with Emma Stone, we met up in Athens to kind of work out what we would do with the wardrobe. So I wanted her input in all of it. Needed to kind of work with her on it, and I had this big kind of probably about 6 big suitcases just full of shapes and ideas and things to try on, and we had a day of dressing up, and it just seemed to work for the character and for her, and to have these little shorts. But it's definitely a pair of knickers and not a mini skirt. It's the idea is that she's wearing the idea is that she's kind of getting herself dressed when she goes off to Lisbon. She has this blue traveling costume, and she's been dressed in that to go off on the trip. But when she goes and has the siesta with Duncan and then comes out again into Lisbon, she doesn't bother to put the skirt on. And I suppose that's because she just doesn't sort of know that you should put the skirt on, or that, sartorially speaking, you should put the skirt on. So she just steps out into the streets in her knickers. What was on my mind was not to deliver something that looked pornographic or like sex stuff, or like, there's lots of I had lots of great images of Victorian brothels, and these women looked incredible. They had corsets on, and really amazing corsets, and long black stockings, and really kind of exaggerated boots. But we didn't bother with the corset. We felt like it was not an appropriate thing to, it's too sort of shackling for this very free, liberated character. So I wanted to design something that didn't have a corset in it for the brothel. So instead, everything was breast revealing. So the whole the shapes are all about revealing the breasts. You don't see it so much because the other women are not, well, they're revealed a little bit, but they had these bodices, and they were made out of this fabulous fabric that I found, that was not, I didn't find it, someone the buyer found, that was wool, like a floral wool that was covered in latex. So it had this kind of interesting texture, and it was like skin. And we made each of the women in the brothel one of these bodices with huge sleeves, and the breasts were revealed, and their whole bodies were revealed. If the person, if they wanted to be revealed, they were. And so it was about celebrating their bodies, really. That was what I was thinking. And also the color palette again was just, I felt like it was a really soft, beautiful palette in different skin tones that was just very easy on the eye in this very beautiful space. The brothel itself was all peacock blues and purples and quite heavy colours. So I thought this would be quite a good thing to do. I actually pushed him into a different time period. That's why he looks different. So he's not in Victorian dress. So I pushed him and Martha, played by Hannah Shagur, I pushed them more into like the sort of early 30s. That's what I was trying to do, because they're so progressive in their outlook and their worldview. I felt like it was, would be a nice thing to do, to give them a slightly different period. And Yorgos was up for that. So that's what we did. So that blue jacket was almost, I think it was like a sort of 20s nautical double-breasted jacket that I'd found that, it just worked on him. And I mean, he's such a kind of clothes horse, he looks great in everything. Worst day probably when Emma Stone's sleeve fell off mid-shoot, because she was throwing raspberries around, and I realized that the clothes really needed to have, we call it a gusset. It's like a kind of piece that goes under the arm to stop basically I realized that the costumes had to be made like ballet costumes, because she was moving everything in a way that people don't tend to do in these sorts of clothes. So that was a terrible moment when I had to go and sort out, an arm that had fallen off a jacket, because obviously it held up the filming. It's not a good thing. It's not a good look. And the best moment, there was I think the wedding dress was a moment, because the wedding dress was a real faff to make. It was very tricky. It was trying to make this big structure that was also sort of defying gravity. It had to hold up like these big balloons, but it was almost made of nothing. And I was slightly dreading it, and I'd had a text in the middle of the night to say it was going a bit wrong, and I was really, really worried. And then it all came together as things often do. So I think that was the best moment.